When Rob Reiner's family lawyer stood before reporters and read the final will, nobody expected what came next. The legendary director behind When Harry Met Sally and The Princess Bride had left the bulk of his fortune to Nick, the son arrested for killing him and his wife just weeks earlier. $200 million. And according to California law, there might be nothing anyone can do to stop him from getting it. Rob Reiner wasn't just a director. He was Hollywood royalty, the son of comedy legend Carl Reiner, who built his own empire one film at a time. Starting in the 1970s as meathead on All in the Family, he transformed himself into one of the most successful directors in cinema history. Stand By Me. A Few Good Men. The American President. Misery. This Is Spinal Tap. Each one a box office hit. Each one adding millions to an estate that would eventually reach $200 million. But money, as Reiner himself once said in a 2018 interview with Variety, was never the point. He told the reporter that his children were everything to him, that he'd built his career so they'd never have to struggle the way he did early on. Those words feel different now, knowing what happened inside his Brentwood mansion on December 14, 2025. The call came into the Los Angeles Police Department at 6:47 a.m. A housekeeper had arrived for her morning shift and found both Rob and his wife Michele Singer Reiner dead in their bedroom. The scene, according to sources close to the investigation, showed signs of a violent struggle. Within hours, detectives had focused on one suspect, 34-year-old Nick Reiner, their youngest son. He was arrested that same afternoon at a hotel in Santa Monica, just 12 miles from the crime scene. The charges were immediate and severe, 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. In California, that means the possibility of life without parole. Nick Reiner had always been the troubled one. Friends of the family, speaking anonymously to the press in the days following the arrest, painted a picture of a young man who'd battled addiction since his teenage years. It started, according to people close to the family, when Nick was just 16. He'd been in a car accident, broke his collarbone and several ribs, and was prescribed OxyContin for the pain. That prescription, meant to last 2 weeks, turned into something much darker. Within 6 months, Nick was buying pills off the street. Within a year, he'd moved on to cocaine when the pills became too expensive. Rob and Michele tried everything. There were stints in rehab, at least 4 that people could remember, maybe more that the family kept private. There was a 6-month program at a facility in Arizona that cost $90,000. There was a 3-month stay at Promises in Malibu, the celebrity rehab center where Lindsay Lohan and Ben Affleck had gone, that ran another $75,000. There were interventions that didn't stick. Rob had reportedly spent close to $500,000 on treatment centers, on therapists, on sober living facilities, on programs that promised to turn things around. Michele, his second wife and Nick's mother, had been even more protective. She'd once told a friend, according to a December 2025 article in The Hollywood Reporter, that she blamed herself for Nick's struggles, that she should have seen the signs earlier, that maybe if they'd gotten him help sooner things would be different. But addiction wasn't the only issue. Court records from 2019 show that Nick had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and severe depression. The diagnosis came after his second hospitalization, when he was 28 years old. He'd been found in a park in Santa Monica at 3 in the morning, screaming at people who weren't there. When police approached him, he told them that the government was monitoring his thoughts through satellites. He was placed on a 5150 hold, California's involuntary psychiatric commitment law, and spent 2 weeks in a psychiatric ward at UCLA Medical Center. That's where doctors first put him on lithium and antipsychotic medication. The second hospitalization came in 2021. Nick had stopped taking his medications, something that happens frequently with bipolar patients who feel better and convince themselves they don't need pills anymore. Within weeks, he was in another manic episode. This time, family members found him trying to break into Rob's office at Castle Rock Entertainment, claiming that his father had stolen his movie ideas and made millions off them. Security called the police. Nick was hospitalized again, this time for nearly a month. The details of those episodes remain private, sealed by medical confidentiality laws, but they're significant for one reason: they might be the key to Nick keeping his inheritance. Here's where California law gets complicated. The state has what's called a slayer statute. It's been on the books since 1872, updated several times, most recently in 2018. The principle is straightforward: if you kill someone, you can't profit from their death by inheriting from them. The law treats you as if you died before the victim. Your share of the estate gets redistributed to other heirs. It's based on an Old English common law principle that says no one should benefit from their own wrongdoing. In most cases, this would mean Nick Reiner walks away with nothing. His portion of the $200 million would be split among his three siblings, Romy, Jake, and Tracy. But there's an exception. The slayer statute only applies when the killing is intentional. If Nick's defense team can prove he wasn't in control of his actions, if they can convince a jury that he was legally insane at the moment of the murders, then the statute doesn't apply. He'd still face criminal consequences, likely decades in a psychiatric facility, but he could still inherit. Sean Weisbart, an estate attorney who's handled similar cases in California, explained it to reporters this way: the law requires criminal intent. If that intent is negated by mental illness, if the defendant genuinely didn't understand what they were doing or couldn't control their actions, then from a probate perspective, they haven't violated the statute. It's a high bar to clear, but it's possible. The insanity defense in California has a specific legal standard. It's called the Manhattan Rule, named after a British case from 1843. To succeed, Nick's attorneys have to prove that at the time of the murders, he either didn't understand what he was doing or didn't understand that what he was doing was wrong. It's not enough to show that he has mental illness. It's not enough to show that his judgment was impaired. They have to prove that his grip on reality was so completely severed that he couldn't form criminal intent. Only about 1% of criminal defendants attempt an insanity defense. Of those, less than 25% succeed. Nick's defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney Jennifer Ling, filed a motion in early January 2026 indicating they'll pursue exactly that strategy. They're arguing that Nick was in the middle of a psychotic episode, that he wasn't taking his prescribed medications, and that he has no memory of the night his parents died. Ling has represented several high-profile clients in Los Angeles, including a former NFL player accused of murder who was ultimately found not guilty by reason of insanity. She knows how to build these cases. Whether that defense succeeds is a question for a criminal trial that won't start for at least another year, maybe longer given the complexity of the psychiatric evaluations involved. But the will itself? That's already public. And what it says has torn the Reiner family apart. Rob Reiner's will was drafted in 2022, 3 years before his death. He worked with Martin Schwartz, one of the top estate planning attorneys in Los Angeles, someone who'd handled wills for dozens of entertainment industry figures. According to the document, filed with Los Angeles County Superior Court in late December 2025, Nick was to receive 40% of the estate. Not because Rob loved him more than his other children. The will explicitly states the reasoning, and it's worth reading the exact language: I leave a larger portion to my son Nicholas because I fear for his future stability and believe he will need greater financial security than his siblings, who have demonstrated the ability to support themselves independently. Rob allocated 25% to Romy, 25% to Jake, and 10% to Tracy, his adopted daughter from his first marriage to director Penny Marshall. That breakdown means Nick would get approximately $80 million, Romy and Jake would each get $50 million, and Tracy would get $20 million. Those numbers are based on the estate's value at the time of Rob's death. With the ongoing royalties and investment income accumulating during probate, those figures could be significantly higher by the time anyone actually receives their inheritance. That 10% figure for Tracy immediately became a flashpoint. Tracy Reiner, now 58 years old, is a working actress who appeared in several of her father's films, including When Harry Met Sally, where she played the memorable role of Emily, the woman in the restaurant who says, "I'll have what she's having," after Meg Ryan's famous fake orgasm scene. She was also in A League of Their Own, playing Betty Spaghetti Horn. She'd always been treated as a full member of the family, or so she thought. She was invited to every family gathering. She was there for holidays. Her kids called Rob Grandpa and Michele Grandma. The will told a different story. Rob's reasoning, spelled out in a separate letter attached to the will, was that Tracy had her own career and her own financial independence. He believed she needed less support than her siblings. The letter mentioned that Tracy's mother, Penny Marshall, who died in 2018, had left Tracy a substantial inheritance of her own, estimated at around $15 million. Rob apparently felt that between Penny's money and Tracy's acting career, she was set up better than Nick would ever be. But to Romy and Jake, that 10% wasn't just about the money or Rob's reasoning. It was about blood. Within 2 weeks of the will being made public, Romy and Jake Reiner hired Bradley Silverman, one of Los Angeles's most aggressive probate litigators. Silverman had made a name for himself handling contested estates for wealthy families across Southern California. His approach was known for being combative, for finding every possible angle to challenge a will, for dragging cases out until the other side gave up or settled. They filed a petition to contest the will on 2 grounds. First, they argued that Nick should be disqualified under the Slayer statute regardless of any insanity defense. Second, and more controversially, they argued that Tracy's share should be reduced further or eliminated entirely because she was adopted, not a biological child, and therefore shouldn't have equal standing with Rob's real children. California law actually doesn't distinguish between adopted and biological children when it comes to inheritance. Once an adoption is finalized, the adopted child has the exact same legal rights as a biological child. That's been settled law in California since the 1960s. But Romy and Jake's attorneys found a potential angle. Rob's will included language about bloodline in reference to a family trust that held real estate holdings separate from the main estate. That trust, worth an estimated $40 million, was supposed to pass to biological descendants only. The lawyers argued that this language reflected Rob's true intent, that he viewed biological children as his real heirs and Tracy as something less than equal. The trust in question was established by Rob's father, Carl Reiner, back in the 1980s. Carl had been explicit in his estate planning documents that certain family properties, including a compound in the Hollywood Hills that had been in the Reiner family since the 1950s, should stay with blood relatives. When Carl died in 2020 at age 98, those properties passed to Rob. Rob maintained them as part of the separate trust, keeping Carl's language about biological descendants. Romy and Jake's lawyers seized on that language, arguing it showed Rob's real feelings about adoption and family. Tracy's response came through her own attorney, Margaret Chen, in a statement released to the press in January 2026. Chen is a powerhouse in Los Angeles legal circles, known for taking on cases involving women's rights and family law. She called the challenge a disgraceful attempt to rewrite a father's wishes and erase a daughter who spent her entire life as part of this family. She pointed out that Rob had legally adopted Tracy in 1971, when Tracy was just 7 years old. He'd raised her from that point forward. He'd walked her down the aisle at her wedding in 1995. He'd been present for the birth of her 3 children, his grandchildren. He'd cast her in his movies, trusted her with roles that could have gone to any actress in Hollywood. The bloodline language in the trust, Chen argued, was a technicality related to a specific piece of property that had been in the Reiner family for generations, established by Carl's wishes, not a statement about how Rob viewed Tracy's status as his daughter. Chen filed a counter-petition pointing out that if Rob had truly wanted to exclude Tracy or treat her as less than his other children, he could have done so explicitly. Instead, he left her 10% with a clear explanation of why. He didn't say, "Tracy isn't really my daughter," or "Tracy doesn't deserve as much because she's adopted." He said she had her own resources and didn't need as much support. That's a different calculation entirely. Chen also submitted as evidence a handwritten note Rob had written to Tracy in 2020, found among his personal papers, that said, "You've always been my daughter in every way that matters. I'm so proud of the woman you've become." That note, Chen argued, showed Rob's true feelings more clearly than any legal boilerplate in a trust document he'd inherited from his father. Tracy's inheritance reveals something darker about how grief can turn into greed. Romy Reiner, 42, works as a producer in Los Angeles. She's had a comfortable career, nothing close to her father's success, but enough to own a home in Silver Lake and send her 2 kids to private school. Her production company has worked on several independent films and a couple of streaming documentaries. She makes a decent living, probably pulling in $200,000 to $300,000 a year. Not rich by Hollywood standards, but comfortable. Jake Reiner, 39, took a different path. He left the entertainment industry entirely after working as an assistant director on a few of his father's projects in his 20s. He decided Hollywood wasn't for him and moved to San Francisco in 2012 to work in tech. He's now a co-founder of a software startup that builds productivity tools for small businesses. The company raised $8 million in venture capital funding in 2023 and Jake owns about 20% of it. If the company succeeds and eventually gets acquired or goes public, Jake could end up wealthier than his father ever was. But that's speculative. Right now, he's living off investor money and his salary, probably making $150,000 a year. Both siblings were financially stable before their parents died. The extra money from reducing Tracy's share wouldn't change their lives in any meaningful way. Split 3 ways instead of 4, Tracy's $20 million would add about $6.7 million to each of their inheritances. That's not nothing, but when you're already set to receive $50 million, does another $6.7 million really matter? Apparently it does. Or maybe it's not about the money at all. Maybe it's about something else. Friends of the family have told reporters that the relationship between the biological children and Tracy had been strained for years, long before Rob's death. There were arguments at family gatherings, usually small things that built up over time. Tracy would make a comment about growing up with Penny Marshall, about what it was like being raised by a single mother who was also a famous director, and Romy or Jake would roll their eyes or make a snide remark about how Tracy always had to make everything about her. There were subtle exclusions from certain events. One year, Romy threw a birthday party for her daughter and didn't invite Tracy's kids, even though the cousins had always been close. When Tracy confronted her about it, Romy claimed it was just a small party and she couldn't invite everyone. But Jake's kids were there. There were comments about how Tracy wasn't a real Reiner, despite carrying the name for over 50 years. Those comments usually came after a few drinks at family dinners, someone making a joke that cut a little too deep. Rob and Michele had apparently tried to smooth things over, insisting that all 4 children were equal in their eyes, that they loved Tracy just as much as they loved the others. But parents can't force siblings to love each other. They can't mandate respect or erase the resentments that build up over decades. And clearly, those resentments were deeper than Rob realized. What makes the legal battle even more complicated is that California's probate system moves slowly, especially when there are contested wills and criminal charges involved. Cases like this, where multiple parties are contesting the will and a murder trial is pending, can take 3 to 5 years to resolve, sometimes longer. During that entire time, the estate remains frozen. Nobody gets anything. The money sits in accounts managed by a court-appointed administrator who gets paid a percentage of the estate's value for their services. That administrator is currently earning approximately $400,000 per year to oversee Rob's assets. The longer this drags out, the more money gets siphoned off in administrative fees, legal costs, and court expenses. And it's not just the administrator getting paid. Each of the 4 siblings has their own attorney charging between $700 and $850 per hour. Those legal fees come out of the estate, not from the siblings' personal funds. So every hour spent in depositions, every motion filed, every court appearance reduces what will eventually be distributed to the heirs. Over 3 to 5 years of litigation, those legal bills could easily reach $5 to $10 million total. Then there's the issue of Rob's ongoing royalties. His films continue to generate substantial income even after his death. When Harry Met Sally alone brings in an estimated $2 million annually from streaming services and television broadcasts. A Few Good Men generates similar numbers. The Princess Bride adds another $1.5 million per year. Stand By Me brings in about $1 million annually. This Is Spinal Tap generates around $800,000 per year. Rob's total royalty income is estimated at around $8 million per year. Over 3 years of litigation, that's $24 million. Over 5 years, it's $40 million. All of that money flows into the estate, accumulating while the family fights. of Nick's mental state has become the central issue in both the criminal case and the probate proceedings. His attorneys have submitted medical records showing a pattern of increasingly severe mental health crises dating back to his teenage years. There are hospital admission forms, therapy notes documenting severe paranoid delusions, and prescription records showing that Nick was supposed to be taking 3 different psychiatric medications but had stopped refilling them in October 2025, 2 months before his parents died. The prosecution has a different interpretation. Deputy District Attorney Sarah Chen has argued that Nick's decision to stop taking his medications was deliberate and calculated. She points to text messages recovered from his phone showing that he'd researched insanity defenses in California and had looked up information about the Slayer statute. In one message from November, Nick wrote, "Do you know anything about insanity please? Like how do they work in California?" In another, he wrote, "I read that if you're found insane you can still inherit money. That's crazy, right?" Chen also points to Nick's internet search history. In the weeks before the murders, Nick had Googled California Insanity Defense Requirements, Manhattan Rule Explained, and What is the Slayer Statute in California? Those searches, Chen argues, show premeditation and planning, not genuine mental illness preventing him from understanding his actions. There's another crucial detail. When police searched Nick's hotel room after his arrest, they found a copy of Rob's will. How Nick obtained it isn't clear, as Rob's attorney claims it wasn't given to any of the children before his death. The prosecution suggests this points to premeditation, that Nick knew what he stood to inherit. Nick's defense counters that his mental state was so deteriorated he was paranoid and collecting documents as part of his illness. They point to other items found in his room, dozens of printed articles about his father, old family photos, and notebooks filled with incoherent writing about conspiracies. There's another angle that gets less attention but matters equally, Michele Singer Reiner. She wasn't just Rob's wife of 36 years. She was a photographer and artist with gallery showings across the country. She came from money herself, bringing approximately $30 million to the marriage from a trust fund established by her grandfather. Michele maintains separate assets, including a vacation home in Montecito and an art collection valued at around $8 million. Michele's will takes a completely different approach from Rob's. She left her separate assets equally to all 4 children, 25% each to Nick, Romy, Jake, and Tracy. No explanations. No special provisions. Just equal shares. This creates another complication. If Nick is disqualified under the Slayer statute, he loses his share of both parents' estates. But if he succeeds with an insanity defense, he could inherit from both, walking away with approximately $89.5 million total. Rob and Michele also own significant real estate together. Their primary residence in Brentwood is worth approximately $18 million. They owned a beach house in Malibu worth around $12 million and a ranch in Montana valued at $6 million. These properties require ongoing maintenance costing approximately $45,000 per month, over $500,000 per year coming out of the estate while the legal battles play out. Some observers have suggested the smartest move would be negotiating a settlement. Split everything equally, put Nick's share in a restricted trust for his care, give Tracy an equal 25% share, and avoid years of litigation. From a financial standpoint, that makes sense. But it would require Romy and Jake to admit Tracy deserves equal treatment, require Tracy to accept Rob had valid reasons for giving her less, and require all 3 to agree Nick deserves anything at all. None of that has happened. The positions have only hardened. Nick remains in jail without bail. His trial is scheduled for March 2027, more than 2 years after his arrest. Meanwhile, Tracy has stopped speaking to Romy and Jake entirely. She's told friends she'll never forgive them for trying to erase her from the family. Romy and Jake maintain this isn't personal, that they're simply trying to honor what they believe were Rob's true wishes. The Reiner family story was supposed to be about talent passed down through generations. Carl Reiner created the Dick Van Dyke Show. Rob built his own empire as a director. But now, instead of being remembered for artistic achievement, the Reiner family will be remembered for a murder trial, a contested will, and siblings who destroyed each other over money. And here's what nobody talks about enough: this didn't have to happen this way. Rob had options. He could have set up an irrevocable trust during his lifetime, distributing assets before he died and avoiding probate entirely. He could have structured Nick's inheritance with stricter conditions, managed by independent trustees. He could have addressed the Tracy situation more clearly, either explaining his reasoning more thoroughly or treating her equally despite her other resources. Estate planning attorneys work with complicated family dynamics all the time. There are solutions for every problem: spendthrift trusts for heirs who can't manage money, incentive trusts that release funds based on achieving goals, trusts with independent trustees. Martin Schwartz, Rob's attorney, surely presented these options. But Rob apparently didn't want that level of control or complexity. He wanted to believe his family would handle it. He wanted to trust that his children would respect his wishes and take care of each other. That faith ignored decades of evidence that these siblings didn't get along. It ignored Nick's worsening mental health and the real possibility that untreated bipolar disorder combined with substance abuse could lead to violence. It ignored the resentment between the biological children and Tracy that everyone could see building. Rob chose hope over reality. He chose to believe in a version of his family that existed in his mind but perhaps never existed in practice. And now his estate has become a battleground where love has been replaced by lawyers, where family bonds have been severed by accusations and countersuits, where a father's legacy is being measured not in the films he made but in the fortune he left behind and the destruction it caused. The trial hasn't even started yet. The psychiatric evaluations are ongoing. The probate proceedings could drag on for years. And at the center of it all is a question that may never have a satisfying answer: what did Nick Reiner understand on the night of December 14, 2025? Was he a calculating killer who researched his legal options and planned his parents' murders to secure an inheritance? Or was he a deeply ill man whose grip on reality had completely shattered, leaving him unable to understand or control his actions? The answer to that question will determine whether he walks away with $80 million or spends the rest of his life in prison or a psychiatric facility with nothing. It will determine whether Tracy gets to keep her 10% or loses even that to siblings who don't consider her a real member of the family. It will determine whether Romy and Jake's fight was about honoring their father's wishes or about greed disguised as principle. What we know for certain is that Rob Reiner spent 40 years building a fortune and a legacy. In the end, that fortune didn't protect his family. It destroyed them. And that legacy, all those beautiful films about human connection and love, now sits in the shadow of a family that couldn't find a way to stay connected when it mattered most. Do you think Nick should inherit if he's found not guilty by reason of insanity? Let me know what you think.